All right, welcome to session 4. We are going to talk about the Atlantic slave trade. The Atlantic slave trade is also called triangular trade and everything because they would it's a triangle going back and forth across America. They would come down to Africa and they would visit these things. We're going to talk about them later called slave castles, and they would there buy slaves and put them onto the boat. Now, slaves over here in Africa were cheaper. They're selling for about $10. We're going to talk about this in a minute. They're buying them for about $10 down here. You're going to be able to sell them over in the New World for $600. The markup is insane. And so they would come down here, and where you could buy slaves cheap in Africa, they would buy them for $10 a piece. Then they would go across the ocean, first leg of the triangle. You're going over there, and they would stop at the the Indies, the West Indies, and from the Spanish and the Dutch and everything, they would buy sugar cane, which was very profitable to sell in England, but where could you get it very cheap? You could get it very cheap in the Caribbean. And then they would also sometimes stop in America where you could get tobacco. Tobacco was something you could get cheaper in America because that's where it was plentiful. And then you could take it to Europe where it's more expensive and everything. So you're taking the slaves over to the Americas, and then you're trading them for sugar cane and for tobacco. Then you're going back over to England and you're trading the sugar cane and tobacco, which you got at a good markup. You're trading it for cloth, and you're trading it for guns, and you're trading it for rum. Things they have plentiful in England, and then you get that at a good rate. And then you take those back down to Africa. You trade for slaves. It was a constant taking your cargo from one place, trading it for where it was so sought after, and getting something cheaper, and then taking over to the next one, getting something so sought after, like the tobacco at this time, and then continue the trade. Boom, 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 boom. These boat captains were making so much money. When we talk about the slave ships, there are times that they would literally burn the ship when they were done with the thing and still make enough money on that run, that triangle run, to buy another ship to keep on going. I mean, it was that profitable of a trade. It's the triangle trade. 1619 is the first time that you're going to have a slave show up in America, and that is 1 year before the Pilgrims get there, because we're talking 1619, so it's 1620 when you see the Pilgrims. They were brought over by the Dutch West Indies Company. You remember we had the East Indies and everybody was sailing around Africa, and then you had the West Indies when they were trying to get to India going west. But the Dutch West India Company brought one to Jamestown, and that is the first slave brought to America. Once again, your New England states not liking it, but the Virginia Southern plantation was all about the money and everything. And I've told you before, when you see money before you see the person, you're headed down the wrong road. So how did the Dutch start it? The Dutch actually would go down to Africa and they would lay trinkets onto the beach. And then they would go back and get on their boat. And then they would watch the people come out of the jungles and pick up the trinkets and get things they needed, like spoons and knives and things like that, things that they could get cheaper. Then they would wait for the second day. They would go back to the beach. They would spread trinkets all over the beach and everything, and then get back on their boat. They would watch the people come out and everything, take the stuff. They said they would do it a third day, and they would put the trinkets out on the beach, and then they would stay on the beach. When the people would show up, they would begin to give them food, to try and be kind to them, try and show them, hey, we're being friendly. And then they would let them get in the little boat, take them out to their big boat to see it, and then kidnap them and stick them in the cargo hold of the boat. And so the Dutch were deceptive with it, but the Dutch were the most humane, because it's going to get bad when we talk about this. They were the most humane with it. They actually believed in fattening the slaves up, and so they would feed them and take care of them. And they were treating them better, if you could say that, but they fattened them up because they wanted them to look really good when they sold them. It's going to, when it gets going, where there's so many slaves being brought over, the markup from $10 to $600 is what they're going to be able to sell for, is just going to where they just stack them like cordwood then. But we'll talk about that more as we go on. But they would, like I say, they would go down there and steal the slaves. Well, the tribes there in the area begin to notice that they could slaves were being taken by the Dutch. And so what the tribes did, when they would war with each other, they would trap the tribe, bring them down to the beach and everything like that, hold them there. And when the Dutch came back, sell them. Well, then they started making these elaborate buildings that you're going to see that's called slave castles. Um, they are going to be brought in by the Muslim slave traders, because once they see the tribes making money off of this, selling who your enemy was at that time off to the Dutch, you're going to see the Muslim slave traders come down and take over big time in this area. They build these elaborate slave castles, which on the outside are these amazing, beautiful buildings that you're going to drive by on a boat and see and go, wow, and stop. And inside it's just a dungeon. That is all it is. It's called a slave castle, but it is a slave dungeon with a pretty outside is all it is. And so they would bring the Muslim slave traders would go out, they would capture people, bring them back, put them in there, and then now you got the Spanish coming down and just picking up and going and picking up and going and picking up, trying to feed into that sugarcane plantation, and it will start into the Virginia with the tobacco and stuff like that too. Like I said, the markup was insane. They could buy them for $10 for a human individual and then sell them over to the Spanish over there for $600. And by 1840, the British are going to outlaw, right before the Civil War happens and everything, they're going to outlaw the slave trade. The British are at this point, and that is going to cause the price of a slave to even jump more. Between 1840 to 1860, the cost was about $1,500 is what they were making at your investment of the $10. It was feeding the greed that made people just continue to do this like a business and everything like that. So by 1775, it's going to pervade the place so much that 1 out of every 6 people in America are slaves. It's just taken over the culture. By the time we get to the Civil War, we're going to have had 20 million slaves brought to the New World. Well, a little over 10% of that goes to the United States. I really need you to understand the Caribbean was sucking up a lot of that slave trade right there due to the sugar cane. So it is called the Middle Passage is the part we want to talk about, though. The Middle Passage is important. It is when you come down from England and then you go from Africa to the Americas. This part, the Africa to the Americas, is called the Middle Passage. It's the part that deals with people, and that's why it gets a name and everything. These slave ships, when you saw them, they were only about 100 foot long, and they were about 25 foot wide. And they're not a massively huge ship, but they would pack on that boat 450 slaves on a boat that size, plus all the other parts of the boat. In the slave section, they were just stacking them like firewood. It was disgusting. They would literally take and build these shelves. And so you would have a shelf that was 2 foot by 5 foot. And in that shelf, they would be able to stack 22 people in a 2 foot by 5 foot. Literally 2 people laid side by side on the bottom thing. You're in a 2 foot section. You are squished on top of each other. And then you are laying there, and right above your head is a board right there. I mean, you're laying on your back, and there's another board. You're breathing out and seeing your breath, hit the ceiling right there. And then there's 2 more people on top of that. And then there would be another board, and then 2 more people on top of that. And they could actually fit 22 people in a 5 by 2 foot space. They would pack them onto this boat, and now you're looking at a 10-week to 12-week trip in those things like that. You're going to lose about 20% of the slaves on the ride over. It's going to be that rough of a trip, because they would put them in the cargo holds and they would latch it shut. They found that if they let them out, because the conditions are going to be so bad down there, if they came up to the boat, you're thinking you're on a boat, where are you going to go? They would literally come out and just jump over and jump into the sea. It is so bad in the bottom of this boat. Your option is eaten by sharks, and people gladly constantly took that option. And so should start to give you how bad a picture it's going to be down there. You're stacked in there like that. The water was brought in beforehand and put down there in big barrels and everything. So the water, by the time you're getting there, it's 12 weeks old. It is stagnant. It's like old pond water, which as you're drinking that, that's making you sick. And the barely getting any food down there, so you're starving, you're retching because the water's making you sick. The bathrooms were just go down there. Sadly to say, sometimes on those boats, with the people stacked up like this, there were instances where the people on the bottom layer would drown. And you're literally drowning in where people are going to the bathroom above you and it's just running down all these things and people are vomiting and then the water spraying in and it's just this toxic goo on the bottom that's just floating there and people in it. It's insane. There was little or no airflow hardly down there at all. They were chained naked because they didn't want them to be able to bring on any things to get out with or anything like that. So they were put on there naked. So you're not only dealing with the humiliation, you're dealing with the horrible conditions, just a horrible time in life. It's not a part of America's past. Anytime you look at somebody's past, you see good and bad, every one of us. And this is one part of America's past. It's not one of our bright, shining moments. It was a lot of the Spanish that were doing it, and it was a lot of the Dutch starting it. But anytime you're involved with something, if you're just blaming others, and that you have to accept some of the blame. So we do. But so this was the Atlantic slave trade. This is the Middle Passage. Don't know what else to tell you. I did start to say, I said they burned the boats. The boats would be so bad smelling after the trips a lot of times that if you had done more than one trip in that boat, and just because of how much was in the hull of that ship, the urine and the poop and the vomit and everything, they would literally burn the ship sometimes because nobody else would want that. The smell is not coming out of there. And they had made enough money, they could buy a new boat and still profit on that. They said the sharks would actually follow the boats across because when 20% of the people are dying, they were throwing corpses over so often that the sharks would follow them across. By, like I said, the 1840s, it is going to be outlawed by England, and it doesn't stop it in America because it's not going to stop till the Civil War in 1860s when it started. But they went to smaller, faster ships because it was outlawed, and they said they would actually just throw the cargo overboard if being chased. And so it was, why chase them? Because you're just killing people when you do. So, but I'm at the 12-minute mark, and I'm going to stop it here for today. But that is the Atlantic slave trade. See y'all tomorrow.